Mic Drop Moments is sponsored by Grow Radio. Want to launch your own podcast? Grow Radio are here to help. Grow Radio has launched and supported countless podcasts, and they'd love to do the same for you. Just hit record and they'll handle the rest. No editing stress, no technical faff, just a great podcast released when you want. Need a little extra support? Grow Radio's workshops and courses make getting started easy. Let's bring your podcast to life. Message Grow Radio on social media or reach out to Gary Jones, the founder of Grow Radio. Let's make this happen. Welcome to Mic Drop Moments, and today I have a very special guest, and I'm going to introduce him as, well, I sometimes refer to him as the man who does, and he is the man who can, and the man who does my podcast for me. It's Gary Jones.
Hello, how are you doing? You right?
Yes, thank you. And I always say, I just record it and I send it to a man who does. He does all the editing, the producing, all the twiddly bits, all the music. And I don't think I would have ever got my podcast off the ground unless I'd had you involved. Introduce yourself, Gary, and tell us who you are.
Well, bless you. Thank you, Sandra. So my name's Gary. I'm the founder of Grow Radio. I basically help businesses and communities amplify their messages through podcasting. That's what I do. A radio station broadcasts different podcasts to give them an opportunity to be reshared. I offer training courses and workshops to people to upskill them. And also, as Sandra said, I help with the production side of it. So I do the technical stuff that people don't want to do.
And that I don't think I would have ever launched my podcast. I remember coming on one of your training courses, and I'm going to say around 2017, it might have been. It was in the early days.
It was.
I remember I also featured on a podcast, my first podcast around that time, and I didn't really get it. I didn't really understand it. And I thought that's something I want to do one day, but it just never really, I didn't think it was possible for me to do that.
I've got a little story about that workshop if you want me to just tell you about it.
Yeah.
I've never shared this before, but it came to me a couple of days ago. That workshop was the first workshop I did about podcasting. And I had massive imposter syndrome going into that workshop because at the time, everyone, when talking about podcasts, was talking about tech. They were talking about what microphones to use. They were talking about what stuff to do, what effects to put on, all that kind of stuff. I couldn't care less about any of that because for me, it was all about helping people share their stories on podcasting. So I did that workshop with massive imposter syndrome, and I didn't include any word, anything about tech inside the actual workshop, because to this day, I don't believe it's important. The idea, the preparation you do is so much more important than the tech that you use. But I had massive imposter syndrome going into that workshop, and I've never shared that before.
And it'd be interesting to know how many people off that original workshop actually launched a podcast in the end, because I think it's probably, 4 of them,
Four people started it. Yeah. And that workshop was only attended by 9 or 10 people.
Yeah.
It was. So, I've seen 4 people launch it.
Well, it was a catalyst for me. It took me a few years, though. It did take me a few years, and my podcast eventually launched. And next week will be a special episode because it will be 4 years old next week. So,
Gone so quick.
I know. But let's talk all about podcasting. The reason I wanted you on here, obviously, you're the sponsor of my podcast, which I'm eternally grateful for. You produce my podcast. You taught me how to do my podcast. But it's something that a lot of people feel is out of their reach. Even I'm still interviewing people that I'm interviewing them on their very first podcast. People think they can't do it. They can't be a guest. People think they can't do their own podcast because, oh gosh, that's way above me. What would I say? So let's talk through from early conception. Obviously, my advice to my guests is always go and listen to the podcast you want to feature on.
Perfect.
Yeah. But then, do you have to record them all in advance? Do you have to have them planned for a whole episode and series? Do you have to do them weekly? Tell us your thoughts.
So if you do focus on the whole picture, so if you focus on having a podcast which is out there, which has got 12 episodes as a series and all that kind of stuff, it's like trying to eat an elephant. You can't do it without breaking it into smaller chunks. So that's what I'd say to anybody who's looking to start a podcast or even start engaging with podcasts, because the first way to kind of get engaged and start a podcast or get involved as being a guest is, as you said, is start listening to podcasts. That's got to be the fundamental thing you've got to do, because Podcasting is a way that people can engage with you both visually through video podcasts, but also audio with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and all those kind of places that you can listen to them. But if you don't listen to podcasts, you don't understand what they are. You don't understand the questions you get asked. If you're doing research about being a guest on a podcast, like you said, you need to listen to a podcast to hear what the host says, how they say things, the length of questions that they ask, and the length of questions they want to get back from the guests, some of the common questions that they get asked. And if you're looking to launch a podcast, you can figure out what you like and what you don't like in your podcast just by listening to other people's podcasts. All the stuff you don't like, you can chuck away. All the stuff you like, you can put into yours. So listening to podcasts is a first fundamental step to launching or being a guest on a podcast. But you've got to break it down. So you've got to really kind of break it down to the smallest steps you can do. So if you're going to start a podcast, start thinking about, okay, what the podcast is going to be about, what is it going to be, who is it going to be for, how much time have I got to spend on the podcast. So therefore, actually, I can only record them in 10-15 minute blocks. So actually every episode is going to be 10 to 15 minutes long. Can I release one every week? No, I haven't got the time. Can I do it once a month? Yes, I can. So now you've got the frequency. You've got to break it down into those individual questions. But the biggest thing that I find with people is that they start without having that plan, and then things get in the way.
So we're talking about overwhelm, and I think that was one of the things for me in the initial stages. It was the overwhelm thinking, and I didn't start weekly. I think initially, I think I did them every other week, and then I dipped into weekly. It was a bit higgledy-piggledy to start with, and I did coffee chats. My theory was if they were a 10 or 12-minute chat, they were short enough for me to think of enough questions to ask my guests, because I was new to this, that it was short enough for my guests who hadn't done podcasts to feel comfortable, but also for somebody jumping in the car or just making a cup of coffee, they could listen to one quickly. I did morph into deeper conversations, and they are now, on average, I'd say between 20-25 minutes max. And people tend to like that. And I like listening to them. If I'm going somewhere, I listen to the first half in the car. And if I'm coming back, I listen to the second half. And it works. But what I did do, my first ones were quite raw, I would say, but I went with it. I think we try and be perfect. And I think that's one of the key things.
One thing that I love to tell people is done is better than perfect when it comes to podcasting. And I was only talking to a client earlier on today about this, and this person is going to be doing a recap episode, so showcasing one of her previous episodes because things have happened and she can't release an episode next time, which is all good. And she listened back to 2 or 3 episodes to see if they worked. And she just messaged saying, "Oh, my life, I've improved so much since then." And we do. Being on a podcast is a great chance to repeat your key messages that you have in your business, to ask different questions, and just to have different chats. And the more chats you have, the more times you say stuff, the better you become. You lose the ums and the ahs because you've already said it 10,000 times. And those questions, you know what to ask next because you've practiced it. So your interview techniques and your guesting appearances and your key messages just flow so much more. So done is definitely better than perfect. And that also goes with the tech side of it as well, because you can always build upon your tech as you go along. Hell, when I started my podcasting journey, I started with a mobile phone, interviewing
I
people in a coffee
remember.
shop, going like that. It's a way to do it. But did it stop me? No. Did I improve over time? I hope so. I think I did. And it is definitely something that you can start quite raw, and you can review it after 100 episodes or 200 episodes, and you will be completely different. Completely different.
Now, I started mine, I decided that I was going to go audio and visual as well. I made the decision that I wanted my podcast to appear on YouTube. And I'd already got a YouTube channel, and it was something we discussed. But I actually think I know a lot of podcasts are just audio, but I actually think I've seen huge benefit from being on YouTube as well. My engagement, YouTube's owned by Google. It's going to help your rankings anyway. But I do see a benefit of doing both. But you don't have to do both, do you? You can start one way and then expand.
Of course you can. And a lot of people do start audio and incorporate the video afterwards. And it But then so again, other people choose to go video first and then have the audio almost as a separate entity. It all depends on what your community's kind of used to you doing already. If they're used to you producing videos and haven't gone onto YouTube channel, but of course you would probably focus on the video side of it first.
Yeah.
But if they're not, and you want to record it and you don't want the pressure of having to look perfect or look how you look, and you want to record it in your PJs, then obviously you'll go audio. It's up to you. But there's no right or wrong answer to that. It all depends on what your community is used to already and also what you want to do. For me, if you're recording the visual, it makes sense to use that somewhere. And to be fair, there are some stats that say that having a video along with the audio does work better now than it did in previous years. But then saying that, we have moved into more of a video society rather than an audio society that we were 4 years ago or 10 years ago when I started. So times have changed. And also, obviously, the times are changing. We can use the clips, we can use the videos for clips on social media as well. And that's where a lot of people do find new podcasts to listen to. So you can repurpose them as a lot more than you can the audio.
Yeah, and I think when I record my audio, that when I record my solo episodes, I tend not to use the video for that because I like to be in the zone.
Yeah.
And if you're having a conversation, it's easier. But sometimes when you're just talking to yourself, as it is, it's easier to be in the zone. And I tend to only do those audio. What I did find as well, I've learned and I've relaunched my podcast as well. So just
Mm.
because you start it one way doesn't mean to say you can't change the name, you can change the branding, you can change the focus. It doesn't matter, does it?
No, it doesn't. As long as you don't change it every week, then that's fine. If you change it every week, there's no consistency in your message and you could go awry with your audience. The audience wants to tune in to hear you or your message at different times. But changing it after 50 episodes when you reach brand, that's completely different because that's something that you can celebrate. And that's what you did. You did it at a good milestone, did it at a time when you were branding as well, the podcast. It worked. But you
Yeah.
didn't do it, you don't have to do it all the time. Stuff like the music, the graphics, and the intro actually can make a difference to the podcast. And 9 times out of 10, if you can change it, yeah, you don't need to change it often, but you can if you want to.
Now let's talk about those little furry friend guests because I've just seen yours pop up next to you,
Yes.
which is brilliant actually because we have cats, we have dogs, we have children. And that's one thing I learned was, and mine often makes an appearance as well. And that's one thing that I learned was pre-pandemic, we felt we had to be perfect with these perfect backgrounds, with no interruptions. And then that advert, not it wasn't an advert, it was a BBC presenter or some news presenter, and
Yeah.
his child comes in on a baby walker, and the wife's trying to grab the child back, and it became a viral sensation. Everyone was shocked, but the pandemic taught us that we could be sat there in our PJs and slippers, and our family and our children and the interruptions. I now just let them happen, but I know that guests are sometimes uncomfortable. They feel, oh my God, we've got to stop the podcast and all this because their furry friend, I've got cats climbing in front of people. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter, does it?
It doesn't. And to be fair, what you'll find is it will almost have a positive effect on the people who are in the same position. So the people who have got cats and who have got dogs, they see it. They could go, oh, actually, I've just seen a dog in that. Okay, that's fine. That's all good. In my previous question, unbeknownst to everyone there, or hopefully unbeknownst, my dog was barking. But I'm guessing you couldn't hear that because
No.
of the sound suppression. So I carried on talking. But yeah, it does make a difference, and in terms of confidence and making people comfortable as well. It does.
Yeah.
I've got a dog just here, which has been by my side all the way through. He won't make a sound. I've got another dog over there who's going to bark at everything that happens because he's 2 years old and he's got so much energy. I can't burn it off. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
But it's you. If you're a guest on a podcast, obviously you are going to be embarrassed because you don't want your dog to kind of bark and that kind of stuff. But then it's your job as a host to reassure that and actually to kind of make that more, make that environment that actually they're happy with. I
Yeah.
could have recorded this in a podcast studio. I could have recorded this in however many places that I know that I could record a podcast. I've chosen to do it at home because this is where most people will be recording their podcast. Most people won't go into a podcast studio to record it. They would record it in their home, in their office, with things that happen around it. So,
I brief my guests before they come on. I say, ignore your pets, ignore your children, they're fine. If you get a coughing fit, if the dog barks, if my dog barks, we'll just pause it. Or I know a man who can, who will edit it out for me. And
oh,
that's what
by the way, I'm going to hate editing this episode because just like anyone, I don't like the sound of my own voice. So actually, listening to this and edit is going to be a fun episode to do. But it is, yeah, you've set the environment that you people are open to talk and kind of just be themselves, which as a podcast host is the most important job you've got.
and you can edit it out, those ums, those ahs, those ers, those coughs, those sniffs, the sneezes. We can all that can be taken out or muted or whatever. And I
Hmm.
don't get involved in that. You do that for me, which is amazing. And some of it we leave in because it's naturally how you speak.
Yeah,
And sometimes I say and a lot of those mannerisms, but that's just me. And if we were having a conversation, I'd be doing those anyway. So you don't want to make it sound too polished.
no, no, you don't. And to be fair, you mentioned right at the start that a lot of your guests, the first time people going onto podcasts, why would you want to make them any more nervous or any more, what would be the word, any more nervous or any put any more pressure on them than to say to them, "Well, actually, you can't say, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that." You just wouldn't want to. And as a first appearance on the podcast, you want to be made to feel relaxed. You want to make it feel open. And yeah, by doing it in kind of the post edit kind of side of it, that's kind of much better than actually you putting the blocks and putting the boundaries in place to the start. It just makes the interviews flow a lot easier and it makes your guests probably appreciate you more.
Yeah, I'm going to let you into a secret. For the first 2 years of my podcast, maybe 3 years, I didn't tell anybody about it. We never published it.
You
We
didn't, did you? You just put
no,
it into your group.
you just put it into my group, and I never used to tell anybody about it at all. And I don't know why. I don't know why that was. But obviously, talking to you gave me ideas, and you're always giving me ideas, right down to the twiddly bits of music, having a sponsor, putting an advert in there. In fact, the music was the hardest bit. What am I going to have as my twid? And you helped me with that.
The
It,
music is always the hardest bit. I hate choosing music for people because it's so personal to that person. It's one of, yeah, I know some people like hate show notes, some people hate music. Yeah, it depends
I
on how you're wired.
hate show notes with a passion.
That's why I said it. That's why I
I
said
know,
it.
I know. I want to ask you a question actually, and I'm going to share my point of view. I find a podcast that I really enjoy listening to, and I listen to it, and then it suddenly stops. And they say, right, that's the end of this season, and we'll be back very soon. They don't tell you when. Sometimes they never come back. Sometimes you have a season of six and then nothing. And you think, oh, and you've got it in your library and you've got it ready to listen to, but it just never comes back. Mine is consistent. Mine is every single week. And you even taught me that if I hadn't got an episode, we could repurpose a previous one. So, what's your view on this?
So my view on it is it's a massive wasted opportunity. Massive wasted opportunity because you spent that time creating those episodes. You probably spent that time marketing the episodes and spending time organizing all the before, during, and after stuff you do. And then it stops. And it's probably stopped for a number of different reasons. It's probably just not one reason, it's probably a number of different reasons. But as a listener, there's no call to action of where to go next. They haven't finished it off. They've just left you on a cliffhanger, and now you don't know where to go. And that's the missed opportunity part of it, really. It is. So if anyone's finishing an episode, finishing a season, or even a whole podcast, I always get them to do a final episode where they are talking about, okay, this is the final one, or we are going to be returning in this date. But in the meantime, check us out on Facebook, check us out on your website. Have that clear call to action to tell people where to go afterwards and basically to continue the conversation. And if you think actually you're not going to return, don't say you're going to return. Just say to them, we've had a great time doing this podcast. Thank you very much for listening. This is going to be the end of this podcast, and we would love you to join us in insert group name here or whatever it is. But it's a massive missed opportunity. It really is. But the sad thing is that 98% of podcasts on Apple Podcasts or Spotify are in that exact position.
Yeah,
They're in
and
that exact position.
And what shocked me, I saw a stat that many podcasts don't get past the third episode. And I launched another one and we didn't get past the third episode because I wanted to focus my time on this one.
Yep.
There are so many, a huge proportion of podcasts that just do one, two, or three episodes and nothing else.
Yeah. So when I start talking to people about launching podcasts, that's something I always mention, and I always plan it out in 12 episode blocks. Now, obviously, I know you're a big fan of 90-day planning, so therefore 12 episodes fits nicely into that 90 days. 12 episodes also fits into a year as well, and it just means that actually people, if they can get past the first 12, then actually they're going to be flying because they've already passed that milestone. They've already passed that 3 to 6 episode kind of death drop, I suppose you can call it,
Yeah.
of podcasts. But 9 times out of 10, they've fallen because they haven't worked out three things. And that is they haven't worked it into their business plan or the marketing strategy if it's for a business. For the community, they haven't worked out who's going to be doing stuff, who's going to be actually making the podcast, the resources that they've needed to make a podcast they might have underestimated, or they just haven't worked out their time. They just run out of time. And we found out a lot in the pandemic. A lot of people started the podcast because they had loads of time and then it died because the world opened back up again.
Yeah.
So for me, when you're thinking about starting the podcast, it's not just about great stuff. Start a podcast because you can start a podcast in 5 minutes and it can be out there. It's about actually creating a sustainable podcast, which is actually going to give value for not just 12 episodes or 90 days or a year, but for the amount of episodes that you've done. And that's where you're going to find the biggest benefit in
Well,
it if you worked it in.
yeah, as you're one of my team, and I have a strategy. I have a monthly topic. My blog comes into that monthly topic. My podcast comes into that monthly topic. What I talk about in my content comes from that monthly topic. So it becomes easy. And my podcast schedule, and I don't mind sharing this, I share it with you and with Katie, my VA. But, we've already got episodes that are going out on the 25th of August at the time of recording. We are
Yeah.
2 or 3 months because I've got that forward planning. And when I invite my guests, I say, oh, how about we chat around this topic? Or I plan it. And so it becomes natural. I also have batches of recording. I find that when I'm in flow, and I enjoy it. So I've done a lot of episode recording this week because I'm in flow this week. I might have weeks where I don't record any podcasts, and then I'll have another block week where I'm recording lots again. It just makes it easier. I've built podcasting into my business strategy.
Which is the perfect way of doing it. Now imagine it was the opposite and you had your business just running along and then you had this extra thing which is called a podcast that you were just dipping in and out of. Would you be as brought into the idea and would your audience be brought into the idea if you're doing other stuff at the same time? Probably not. But because it's linked in through the monthly themes and because you've got that forward thinking that actually I know well I'm going to be doing this time next time in a few months time, it just makes it easier. It
Yeah.
just makes it easier. Batch recording is a great tool as well because once you've done one interview, you're in the flow, as you said, and the second and third interviews just flow so much easier. The first one of the day is always a bit trickier, and everyone can prepare for a podcast slightly differently. Everyone's got their own different vocal warm ups if they do it, their own little rituals they do. But the main thing is just having that forward thinking, having that plan, which is exactly what you've got. You're doing all the right things.
Thank you. Lovely to hear. Now, this podcast is called Mic Drop Moments. So I'm going to ask you two mic drop moments. The first one being, when was the mic drop moment for you? The reason you realized that you were going to base your whole business around podcasting?
It was a conversation. I can tell you, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was a conversation with a mentor at the time, Brad Burton, and he was saying, the whole conversation lasted 7 minutes, and this 7 minute conversation changed the course of my whole business at the time because he asked me one question, and that was, if money was no object, what would you want to do? And it would say, I just want to interview people and talk to people on a podcast. And as soon as he said that, it came from nowhere because at that point in time, I was thinking, do I carry on with my podcast? What do I do? I already had a social media business, but what should I do? And as soon as I said that, he went, well, there you go. That's what you need to do. And then from there, I then relaunched my podcast and focused purely on podcasting. Yeah, purely on podcasting. Just that one conversation at that time, asking that one question. The follow-up question was actually probably as important. And that was, what's the best case scenario that could happen if you focus on podcasting? What's the worst case scenario? And most likely, what would be the most likely scenario? And as
Yeah.
soon as you work it out, actually, the best case scenario is I just carry on doing what I like and I get paid for it and it's all good. Yeah, that's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, well, I'll just have it on the side and that'll be job done. That's what I've got at the moment, most likely, somewhere in the middle. I'm chuffed with that. That one conversation definitely changed the business.
That's a great piece of learning there. And it's so often we hold back and we don't do something we're passionate about, but we'll never know unless we try.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as usual, I always ask my guests to leave the audience with a piece of advice, a top tip, or piece of wisdom. What would yours be, your mic drop moment for our audience to leave us with?
I would say engage with podcasting a little bit more than what you're doing at the moment. What I mean by that is if you're not listening to podcasts, start listening to podcasts. If you want to become a guest on a podcast, send a post on LinkedIn requesting, saying that I want to talk about these topics on podcasts. And does anyone know of any podcasters who they could put me in touch with? And if you want to start a podcast, start working on the plan. But just start engaging a little bit more. Podcasting isn't just launching a show. It can also be talking to communities around the podcast. It could be listening to podcasts. It could be being a guest. So please don't think that technology is a barrier or perfectionism is something that you should aim for. Just get started with doing something and just kind of start eating the elephant one chunk at a time.
Now, Gary, I promise I will do the show notes for this episode. I promise. But I just want to say to our listeners, if I hadn't taken the plunge and I hadn't done this, I wouldn't be celebrating 4 years of my Mic Drop Moments podcast next week. So thank you for that, Gary. And also, if you are thinking of starting a podcast yourself, I can't recommend a man who can better than Gary. Thank you, Gary.
No, thank you for your support. Cheers.